Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining the session on inclusive innovation, creating a more diverse ecosystem. There will be a chance to pose your questions to all of our speakers at the end of the session, so please do post these throughout the session as well. Now, it's my honor to introduce our host for this session, Yewande Akinola. Yewande is a chartered engineer, innovator, and speaker. Her engineering experience includes the design and construction, innovation, and manufacture of buildings and systems in the built environment. She has worked on projects in the UK, Africa, the Middle East, and East Asia, and has been named the UK Young Woman Engineer of the Year by the Institute of Engineering and Technology and the Exceptional Achiever Award from the Association for BAME Engineers and the Association of Consultancy and Engineering UK. In the 2020 New Year's Honours list, Yewande was awarded MBE for services to engineering, innovation and diversity in STEM and has recently been appointed Innovate UK's Ambassador for Clean Growth and Infrastructure. So over to you, Yewande.
Thank you very much, Suan, and what a wonderful day it is today. Happy International Women's Day to everybody here, to everybody watching. I hope you're celebrating because I'm celebrating. I'm celebrating the amazing excellence that women, pretty much bring to our world every single moment. I feel really, really, really honored because we are being joined by some absolutely incredible people. And I can't wait for the next hour because I know there'll be lots to learn. There'll be great insight to be had. I'm not going to talk too much because I can't wait to really start the conversations with our wonderful guests. We are joined by Alison, Erica, Alexandra, Bola, and Rosanna, and they are going to take us into the depths of data. They're going to take us on a journey into the importance of diversity and inclusion. They're going to talk to us about innovation and women in innovation. And without a doubt, there'd be lots to learn. I'm going to start with Alison. Alison, thank you very much for being here. Alison is the CEO of Talent Intuition, and I love this part of your title, actually, Chief Believer, because that's what it starts with, right? Really believing in something. And she helps HR directors take data and insight to the board to validate their views. She has worked, for lots of different companies, ranging from roles in executive recruitment to sales at monster.com. And now she enjoys leading the Talent Intuition team. And I love this part, actually. She also, when she's not working with the TI team, she is with her family, her wonderful daughter, and her very, very patient husband, who I'm sure are extremely supportive of all that she does. Thank you very much, Alison.
An absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you, Yewande. And I'm also delighted to announce this morning that, courtesy of Innovate UK, I'm also one of the Women in Innovation Award winners. So a massive thank you to Innovate UK, because this is them helping to drive diversity within our environment, and that's brilliant. So for me, I wanted to talk a little bit about innovation and diversity. Innovation is always on, right? Innovation is open to us all. You only need to look at this panel to see that. But processes and frameworks can only take innovation so far. You've got to have the right people. You've got to have diverse backgrounds as part of a team in order to make innovation work. Innovation is at its most successful when you've got an eclectic group of people with really unorthodox ways of thinking and entrepreneurial mindsets, that chief believer mindset. But in a team, you need to make a team up of a variety of different roles. And that might be technologists or strategists. It might be program or project managers or IP experts, but you also might want change agents or entrepreneurs in residence. And you know what, the challenge that we hear from the companies that we work with all the time is, but there aren't enough women for us to do this. There isn't enough diverse talent. And that just simply is no longer true. So we're going to show you how this is a data-driven conversation. So if we move to the next slide, let's just take one role. So this role you can see here, this slide you can see here is data that we have drawn from Strategens, which is our big data platform. And we've taken here the role of new business innovation or innovator. And we've looked at 3 cities across the UK. We've looked at London and Cardiff and Newcastle. We just picked these randomly. And what you can see here is that more than 31% of people in these roles currently are female. So there are women out there who are new business innovators. And if we move to the next slide, I can show you some more detail here. So as a business, Talent Intuition is headquartered in Cardiff. We're really proud to be Welsh at our heart. And if we take a deep dive into Cardiff, then actually what you can see on the slide here is that the breakdown of women in Cardiff by gender is 34% of women in new business innovation roles. You know what, that's something that we should celebrate. Cardiff is leading and driving the force by having a more diverse population in new business innovation roles. But interestingly, if we go to the next slide, if you have a further look and a deeper dive into here, you can see that the majority of women in Cardiff in new business innovation roles actually are in higher education. And that's the data that you can see on the right-hand side. If we now move though and have a look at London, so let's go to the next slide and look at London. And again here on the right-hand side, what you can see is that the majority of women in London actually are working for big corporates. They're in BP, they're in Accenture, they're in HSBC. So already we're beginning to see a difference geographically. But if we go to the next slide, what the data here shows us is that if we break down the females in new business innovation roles, they are spread throughout the UK. And that's something that we should absolutely celebrate. This is not a London-centric or a South-centric thing. There are women in roles throughout the UK innovating. If we move to the next slide, please, and then here what we can see is I've taken another role here. So I've taken a more generic role. I've taken the role of program manager here. And what you're seeing on the slide is, first of all, you can see that there are 163,000 program managers in London, of which 36% are female. And finally, you can see the places, the social places to engage with this female talent. So this is where women in the role of program managers are currently hanging out. This is where they have their profiles socially. And so if we move to the next slide, please, and compare this to Edinburgh, here we can bring up data that says that there are actually just over 8,700 people with the role of program manager in Edinburgh, and 34% of those people are women. So at its simplest, the data shows us where physically the women are. It shows us the companies that they are currently working for. And so talent teams and innovation leaders can use this data to identify and to attract and to engage with female innovators. We work with some of the world's largest companies. And by comparing data from Strategens with their internal teams and the roles in their internal teams, they're able to benchmark the diversity of their talent. They're able to see the total talent pool that's available in the external market. And they can see where they need to be in order to engage with this talent. So when I talked at the beginning about making this a data-driven conversation, that's what we mean. There are no excuses anymore. There are women out there willing to take these roles, but you know what? You've got to go and find them. And if we just look at the next slide, I thought it would be really interesting to compare this to the founder community. So what you can see here is the UK founders and co-founders. So these are people who are currently in these roles in the UK. And interestingly, 35% of these people actually are females, but they're in really different industries. So the top industries for female founders are design, health, fitness, and retail. The top industries for male founders are software, internet, and financial services. And I know we're going to hear more from Alexandra later about attracting females into STEM in particular. So actually, that for me is how we make this a data-led conversation. And so to wrap up, today, thank you. Today, we've only touched on gender. We've shown that actually there is a diverse pool of talent to drive innovation. We've shown that they're in large businesses and small companies and in academic institutions, and that they're spread throughout the UK. So you can use the data to drive diversity in your innovation team. When you've done that, then you have to look at how you can foster a culture of innovation with psychological safety and no fear of failure. And that's the cornerstone to your innovation success. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was, wow, gosh, a lot of food for thought, actually. And I'm really grateful because those figures always are, what you have to present to then continue a conversation, to be honest. All the time people ask, where is the data? Apologies, the noise you can hear is the bin cleaners who have just come to clean the bins in my clothes, but they should be on their way very soon. We are going to continue with Erica. Erica, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro. Erica is a PhD candidate and research officer at LSE, and she's the co-founder at Inventors, where she's leading research that aims to understand and diversify access to venture capital and innovation finance. Her recent industry report, Diversity Beyond Gender, highlights that Black founders received only just 0.24% of venture funding. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Erica, and thank you for your insights as well. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Yewande, and thank you to Sawan and all of the team for pulling this all together. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you this morning. Happy International Women's Day, one and all. As Alison mentioned, there isn't a pipeline problem. What we've been able to see is that actually there is indeed this lack of data, particularly as it pertains to ethnicity and educational background or social class, as well as gender, and that spans across industry, but also is pretty pervasive in UK startups. So I'm going to look briefly this morning at what we've found so far at Inventors and what still needs to be done. So if I can have the next slide, please. So it's already been established that venture capital lacks diversity. According to Diversity VC in 2019, 93% of all funds raised through venture capital in 2018 went to all male founding teams. So the next slide shows that our first piece of research as Extend Ventures was undertaken in May 2020 and looked at the impact of COVID-19 specifically on Black and ethnic-led ventures in response to a growing concern among that community of businesses that they were being forgotten and left behind by the initiatives that were being put forward by the UK government as relief. So that would include Sybil's and the Future Fund. So almost half of those surveyed said that they didn't expect to access and actually had never accessed any support from the government in the creation of or sustaining their businesses. And they hadn't been able to invest private investment despite them trading for sort of 9 or more years. But they also felt that they had enough cash in their reserves to see them through 12 months of the pandemic. And that was really telling to us, because what it started to show through data was that these businesses had been overlooked and underfunded for the last 10 years or more. And they actually were self-sustaining sufficiently enough to be able to weather the COVID storm. Now, the main reason for not investing in businesses like this by investors is that there's a perceived risk. And what they were showing was that actually the risk that was being perceived was only indeed a perception. So the next slide starts to look into the fact that we started then phase 2 of our analysis. We studied over 2,000 companies using a machine learning algorithm that has been trained to detect the perceived gender, the ethnicity, and the educational background. Sorry, the door just went and my dog's decided that he's coming to my rescue. So it tracked the perceived gender, the perceived ethnicity, and the educational background of the founders who had started companies and received venture capital investments between 2009 and 2019. Now, there were limitations to this because a number of VC investments are not made publicly, and some company founders didn't have profile pictures up online, so we weren't able to include them in the results. However, the results shown are for 2002 companies and 3,784 founders. So over the course of the next slides, we'll see what those results told us. So from a gender perspective, nothing that we didn't already know. Accessing venture capital has been consistently harder for women than it has been for men over the last 10 years. And it kind of mirrors what Alison has found in industry. Investment in all female teams across seed, early and later stages averages just under 3% of the total funds invested. When we consider that women make up 51% of the population, that is quite shocking. So moving on to the next slide and ethnicity data, the UK's Black and multi-ethnic communities comprise 14% of the population, yet all ethnic teams received an average of 1.7% of the venture capital investments that were made at seed, early and late stage between 2009 and 2019. Now, the next slide really starts to look at new data for the UK, because while the previous slide showed a grouping of all ethnic entrepreneurs, here we further dissect down into 5 ethnic groups that look at the perceived ethnicity of the founding team members and the share of total investments that they received. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 9 years now, and there's always been talk about the fact that Black founders receive less than 1% of venture capital. But because we were always included in BAME, it was really difficult to understand the numbers more granularly. Now we can confirm that Black founders actually received less than 1/5% of UK VC, with just 38 Black founders funded across the 10-year period. So if we move on to the next slide, when we examined educational background, we categorized elite universities as just 4: Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard and Stanford, and their respective business schools. Tier 1 were the next top 10 universities across the US and the UK, and Tier 2 were the next top 20. What we were able to see is that elite and Tier 1 universities are disproportionately affected at every stage of VC, but seed was the most disproportionate. More than 40% of the funds invested at seed stage went to teams with an elite educated founder, while if you look at elite and Tier 1 teams together, you see that at seed stage they took a whopping 70% of the seed capital invested. You know, to put this into context, according to Statista, 68% of the UK did not attend university at all. So you can see there that you know, if you haven't been elitely educated, it is quite difficult to raise that seed capital, and without raising seed, the pipeline is already narrowed, if you see what I mean. So if we go to the next slide and then look towards intersectionality, you know, especially on International Women's Day, I think it's pretty important that we look at the fact that we are able to create opportunities for all women. And if we look here on this slide, you can see that all women received just under 11% of the total invested over the 10-year period, which again is shockingly bad. But when we break that down by ethnicity, we can see that all ethnicities except white received less than 1% of that money. However, Black women saw the poorest outcomes here, with just 0.02% of the funds going to them. That's a 1 in 5,000 chance of being able to secure funding for a well thought out and potentially even revenue generating business, which we really do need to do something about. So to the next slide. Here we can see that just one Black female founder has received early stage funding in the last 10 years. 194 white females achieved early stage funding across the same period. And I think that we have to kind of start to look at how, as I say, all women are given the opportunity to be carried along when we're looking at initiatives that support gender. So if we go to slide 11, we'll see that the current response to this problem is centred around seeking diversity by adding one diverse team member to a homogenous group. And that's usually somebody that looks very similar, sounds very similar, but is a different gender. And what we've seen is that actually success rates by doing this are 11.5% lower than they would otherwise be if we actually went for real diversity, the type of diversity that's shown on the next slide. Which will show that, if we select from pools in a more inclusive way, we actually reduce risk rather than increasing risk. A clear example of where this has been able to work is displayed on the next slide. K4 Capital have been able to provide consistent internal rates of return between 2011 and 2017, with a structure that openly challenges the conventional status quo for investments. 29% IRR is unthinkable across most VC firms, but they're able to achieve that by looking at this two-dimensional diversity that includes ethnicity, as well as gender, and indeed a diversity of educational background as well. So the next slide sort of just recaps some of the recommendations that we made through the Diversity Beyond Gender report. I won't go through each of them because I know that I am at time now, but essentially some of the key things on here is that we need more transparency. We need to look at creating new filtering processes so that people are invested in the same way that Alison suggested they are hired, which is based on fact, and rather than because I mirror the person that I'm sitting opposite. And so to the next slide, which just kind of shows that further research is needed for us to truly understand some of the interventions that are going to work in creating change across the system. But we are hopeful because we're ever seeing that small incremental movements are being made to create a fairer system. And my final slide just says thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to discuss this with you this morning.
Thank you very much, Erica. Thank you for the insight. And actually the headlines that I've kind of, like scribbled here are untapped talent, untapped possibilities, untapped diversity in the solutions that are on offer with the current, state of affairs as such. And gosh, really, gosh, sobering figures on many fronts. Thank you very much for that, though. Thank you. We will move on to Alex now. I call her Alex because she's a friend, and so I always do the short form of her name. But Alexandra is the founder and director of STEMazing Limited and STEMazing Kids. She is a chartered engineer, fellow of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and on the board of the Women's Engineering Society, She is also a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor at Brunel University and a mom to 2 young kids. She's worked in industry for over 15 years before deciding to focus on STEM inspiration and inclusion through STEMazing. Thank you, Alex, for being here.
Thanks, Yewande. Thank you very much to everyone who's spoken today so far. Erica and Alison, your talks were fantastic, really insightful. And thank you to Innovate UK and happy International Women's Day, everybody. It's an amazing, amazing day to be here with you all. And I'm particularly keen to be talking about the importance of raising women and raising innovation in society. So as Yewande said, I'm Alex. I have now dedicated my mission in life to discussing and raising the profile of STEM in society. So STEM being science, technology, engineering, and maths, and the combination of all of that coming together to make STEM, which is something that is vitally important in our world. And we do not have enough diversity and inclusion in STEM. So it's really, really apt to be talking about this today with Innovate UK, because inclusive innovation is the key to tackling our current and future global challenges. And without that, we're screwed, if I can say that so bluntly. I feel like this is so important and we are not putting enough focus on diversity and inclusion in STEM. We talk a lot about it, but where is the action and where are the results? So this is why I left my career in industry to focus on amplifying inclusion and igniting inspiration in STEM to try and help. Like, as Alison said, there are women out there. Like we do in STEM, we do have a pipeline problem, but we also have a lot of fantastic women in STEM that we can help showcase to really raise the profile of those women and therefore tackle this major problem we have, which is a lack of visible role models, because you can't be what you can't see. And that then filters into the pipeline problem that we have with girls not pursuing STEM and going into fields such as technology and engineering. So I think there are some stark figures that have been shown today already. I don't have any slides, but the two kind of key stats that really stick with me that I'd like to share, a study that Engineering UK did show that only 73% of 11 to 14-year-olds, 73% of 11 to 14-year-olds don't know what engineers do. They don't know really what engineers are. That is absolutely staggering and heartbreaking. The fact that we in the STEM community are not doing enough to showcase what engineering is to young people. And I feel like we have this danger of being in a sort of echo chamber, in a bubble, that we are talking to people who already know the answers, and we need to broaden that net and get outside of our own bubbles, talk to people who would otherwise not be engaging with engineers, scientists, technologists, and telling them the amazing things you can do with STEM. Okay, so we know that in the STEM workforce, there are only 24% women, and in the engineering workforce, there are only 12% women. And when we know, as Erica said, 51% of the population are women, and we want to be designing these inclusive innovations to serve the whole of society, so tackling our global challenges and creating solutions that benefit all of society, we need inclusive teams in STEM and engineering particularly to be able to produce those solutions. So one of the things that I'm really striving to do in my role in running STEMazing is to support women in STEM, empower women in STEM to be more confident, visible role models, and link that into inspiring the next generation of both boys and girls to go into STEM. I found some really interesting research that will probably, won't be unfamiliar to anybody who's got kids of their own, that show that gender stereotypes are formed at a very young age. So this study showed that children aged 3 to 5 already show less support for counter stereotypical careers in STEM. So for example, a girl wanting to be an engineer, children aged 3 to 5 think that that's strange, or that shouldn't be or couldn't be possible. So tackling gender stereotype early with children and getting all of our initiatives to reach children needs to be done as early as possible. And in other research that I've read, so this is from the Journal of Applied Developmental Psychology, did a big study to show that female role models in STEM, so female educators, had a massive influence on girls, as you'd imagine, but also on boys. And I found this particularly interesting. So when girls see a male-only educator in STEM, so maths or physics, chemistry, they assume that STEM is not for them. Subconsciously, they develop that unconscious bias that STEM is not for them. Whereas when they see female educators, the girls think, okay, that could be me. I see that, I can be that. Really interestingly, boys, when they engage with female STEM educators, don't think that STEM is not for them. They equally think it's still for them, but they have a more equitable view on the world. They think, oh, okay, so that's for girls too. And I think this is so important when we talk about diversity and inclusion, because what we find in the STEM workforce, and I've worked in industry for nearly 20 years, and I love being an engineer, but I have experienced firsthand unconscious bias against me as a female engineer. And I feel if we can tackle that bias by having more female role models and more female in STEM educators for boys as well as girls, that helps boys think this is for girls and boys, and have a much more equitable view of who can and should be an engineer, be a technologist, and have that mutual respect. So I think that was particularly interesting to me, the impact that female role models have on not just girls, but boys as well. That's really important for diversity and inclusion. And again, studies have shown that that early age intervention is a key window for opportunity for intervention to start tackling those gender stereotypes. So in STEMazing, I've got 2 key initiatives. One is STEMazing Women, where I support and empower women to be more confident, more visible role models, and up-level their public engagement skills, which is not only great for STEM outreach and going and talking about what they do to young children, it also benefits them in their career. So being able to be more confident about speaking up in meetings, giving presentations, voicing your ideas, your opinions, your perspectives, which is the vital sort of ingredient for innovation. There's no point in building diverse teams if those diverse people in teams don't feel confident to speak up in meetings. Okay, we need their ideas, we need their perspective. So I think that's really important, what I'm doing to help support women, and then connect that to the STEM outreach bit, the inspiration, and doing really, really simple STEM activities that are really fun. That's the main thing, they're fun, to engage and inspire young people, and targeting that at infant and primary age children. So in COVID, over the last year, I've been doing all of that online, and that is actually really effective. So in my STEMazing Inspiration Academy that I run, I'm supporting women to up-level their public engagement and linking them to schools to do STEM outreach at that young age. So all of the role models are women in STEM, and they will be engaging with children at a young age. So I feel like this is something that we can all get involved in. As women, we can put ourselves forward for opportunities to be role models. We can support and empower other women around us to be more visible role models, and try and get out of that chicken and egg situation where we don't have enough women in STEM, so girls don't see role models, so therefore they don't go into STEM, so then we don't have enough women in STEM, and it goes round and round and round. We need to break that cycle and get more visible role models out there so that we can start to see a sea change in inclusion and diversity in the STEM fields, and start to really support women, not just celebrate those kind of handful of women that win amazing awards and do really well. I completely champion that and support that as well. But I also feel like we need to support women who are doing their job day in, day out fantastic work, but don't consider themselves role models because they haven't won awards, they are still amazing role models, and absolutely, with a bit of support and encouragement, can go out there and inspire future generations. We need more of those. So we need to spread the net of that, and make it seem really accessible to be a role model. It's not something that you're up on a pedestal doing. We can all be role models. So I really feel like that's kind of sort of wrapping up, that is an important piece of the jigsaw puzzle, in terms of helping to strive towards greater diversity and inclusion, ultimately aiming for more inclusive innovation in these fundamentally important fields like STEM. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. And your intro line actually, on visibility and the fact that you can't be what you can't see is extremely powerful. And thank you for reminding us of that, because we sometimes forget, as we go about our daily duties, we forget the importance of visibility. Thank you. We've got about 20 minutes left in the session. It's going so well. Definitely is. And I would like for us to also have some questions at the end of it. But we are going to move on to Dr. Bola Olabisi. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll do a little bit of an intro. She is the CEO of Global Women Inventors and Innovators Network, Global WIN. Great acronym. And she wears a number of hats. She's a social entrepreneur, an author, a community development consultant. And she has over 22 years experience in the creation of platforms that stimulate wider inclusiveness, and the exchange of knowledge in areas such as the use of technology, science, and engineering, and intellectual property rights, as well as access to finance. Thank you so much for joining us, Bola. Thank you. We've got you on mute still.
I'm so
There we
sorry
go.
about that. I got carried away. I was enjoying and really listening to all the talks and the presentations that I forgot to unmute myself. But thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I was so enlightened by all the presentations so far. Can I just say that I probably am going to digress a little, because there's a lot of data that has been put forward. I couldn't agree more with everything that has been said. I'm a great person that would say I respect every innovator. But I do want to now put the spotlight on the inventors. And I say this because the inventors somehow have been put in the background. And if you're going to talk about driving innovation, how could we not talk about the inventors? Why is it that we're hearing every time over and over the word innovation? Invention? Why is it happening? Why is it that when I go to places and I start to talk about invention, I start to feel the body, this kind of body language that wants to quickly move on to innovation? I respect both inventors and innovators. And a lot of people might feel that they're the same. Little people might feel that, well, they've got the same qualities. When we talk about innovators, we're talking about inventors. I do agree to a certain degree that that is true, but there are clear differences. And I think if we're going to talk about inclusion and diversity, we cannot ignore we cannot ignore what the inventors bring to the table. We cannot. And that's why when I have any opportunity to talk, I know that there's going to be so much said, and quite rightly, about the innovators, but quite sadly, very little said about the inventors. And I would like to say that where would the innovators be without the inventors? If we truly look at what an inventor is, what's the basic, simple layman language meaning definition of an inventor? An inventor is someone who comes up with the idea, creates it, develops it, that no one else has ever done for the first time. And then, of course, we'll have the innovators who will take it forward, who will improve upon it and take it to market. We mustn't get too bogged down on the words, because so what? An inventor could be an innovator, an inventor could be an entrepreneur. But I have to say, let's pull ourselves back a little. We do have to get bogged down with those words, because not every inventor will become an innovator nor an entrepreneur. And we have to respect this. Do they have a place around the table when we're driving innovation? I would say yes, they do. Because they come with peculiar qualities. Some may agree, some may not. But I would tend to say that after 22 years of working with inventors and innovators, I have seen the differences, and I have seen the transferable skills that they bring to the table that encourages and advances the work that the innovators do. Yet, I have also seen how they have been put to the back, how rejection of society has brought inventors to the stage where it is almost as if they're not in existence. And so using our platform of Global Win, where we talk about both inventors and innovators, every opportunity to bring them back onto the spotlight, to recognize and acknowledge the work that they do is extremely important to us. Some people might say, well, the reason is inventors are single-minded. They're very focused on the product. They're not perhaps interested in taking it forward, because if they were, they would be both an inventor and an innovator. But look at the lessons that are learned when they fail and have to try and try and try and try again. Okay, yes, maybe the innovators would perhaps have more success stories because they're innovators. The description of an innovator is so positive that you couldn't place it next to an inventor. But I also feel that we've gotten to that stage where we need to look back and say, yes, they should be around the table. They do have a positive streak to them. And we need to do everything that we can to ensure that all the accessibilities to funding, support, capacity building measures are also up, that inventors should have those opportunities too. We have situations where we had so many inventors clubs in the United Kingdom, and I watched the numbers drop. Some are still hanging on there, sort of like a shoestring, just holding on, going to the inventors clubs, talking about what matters. And of course, some will get through and will succeed and will get to the stage of becoming an innovator and of course, an entrepreneur. But when we first started in 1998, we couldn't find any data at all. Nothing to prove our point, nothing to show how many women were actually succeeding as inventors. Most of the data that was available were in the universities, in the knowledge exchange and transfer remit. But in the space where you find many of the women inventors that we deal with as lone inventors, the support is limited. We started the campaign, we pushed forward, we worked very closely with what was called UK Patent Office and now Intellectual Property Office. And I'm pleased that now I can give some data. But I would say I have a cautious feel about that, because we need to be very careful of data bias. We need to be very careful of how we get the data that we're putting forward. Who are we approaching? Are we looking at the hard to reach, the networks and the clubs that most people might readily go to them first and partner with them? Well, I can tell you for a fact, as a Global Women's Inventors and Innovators Network, we struggle to partner. Why is this so? I don't have all the answers, But I do have some buttons I want to press in this talk process. And I do hope that after this talk that we will be able to see why it is so important to network, to exchange, and not to reinvent wheels, but to exchange our good practices, and to reach out to those networks and clubs that do need the support of many organizations that are out there and well, or perhaps ahead of the inventors. Well, let's talk about the failure rate. Perhaps one of the reasons is because the percentage of inventors that will probably succeed is probably going to be very low. I do have a couple of data here. I just want to read it out to you, and perhaps you can then draw your own conclusion. I found this 2019 report by the UK Intellectual Property Office, and they came up with some data. And I'm pleased. This is one part that I was actually quite excited about because, as I said and mentioned, in 1998, we had no data. And it made it a challenge because we couldn't have the evidence to prove our points. But now I'll tell you that from 1998 to 2017, although the report was put out in 2019, the proportion of applications with at least as many female inventors as males rose from 3% to 8%. Now, it was written as if we really should be clapping about this because this is supposed to be extremely good news. And then you look at the proportions of patent applications, which have now doubled from 1998, which was 2% in 1998, to 4.5% in 2017. Those are the kind of figures we're looking at. I'll give you another one. The proportion of female inventors worldwide has almost doubled from 6.8% to 12.7%. Now, this is from the report that was put together by the Intellectual Property Office in 2019. Now, one would wonder, is this really good news? So my mission is to try and bring the inventors onto the table. We need to look at that. And we haven't even gotten anywhere near race yet. We're still trying to talk about the women's agenda. So I would hope that and appeal to all those who are working in the innovation sector space to start to consider the positive transferable skills and knowledge that these amazing inventors bring to the table. There's no way you can fail and fail and fail again, and then you manage to succeed to bring a product or service out that you wouldn't have some invaluable skills to transfer that can help any industry and workload.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gosh, that was a very, very different insight, I have to say, but actually what it has done is really made me think about the importance of the magic of discovery, you know, and bringing that back into our language, that initial magic of discovery, which is what inventors bring to our world. And then, you know, seeing it go from obviously that place of, you know, magical discovery to an actual product or service. So thank you very much for that. We are going to move on to Rosanna. Thank you very much for being with us. 1 second. Oh, I clicked on something. Hi there. There we go. Right. Right. So Rosanna is Palladium's Chief Diversity Officer. And this involves maximizing the opportunities that can be realized and from embracing diversity and inclusion for people and the communities with which Palladium works with donor, clients, and supply chain. Rosanna draws upon over 20 years of experience in the record of multi-sector achievement that includes embedding diversity and inclusion contractor requirements into some of the largest infrastructure projects like High Speed 2. And literally, I'm going to stop there because what a place to, even start to speak from in terms of conversation. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much. And first of all, Alison, another shout out from Cardiff from me. I'm a Cardiff woman myself. So you got the thumbs up from me. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. And I'm going to take the topic slightly in a different direction. So far, we've heard some really, really great presentations, talks around, D&I in terms of training and skills, employment, finance and entrepreneurship. That wonderful piece there from Bola with regards to inventors and intellectual property. And what I'm going to do now is take us in a slightly different direction. And I'm going to take us into the world of procurement and supply chains and the ecosystems that all organizations create. Okay. So, we know that there's a lot of talk around diversity and inclusion in terms of organizations, and also in terms of the how that can drive innovation, profitability, productivity. Sorry, I'm just checking on my watch there so I don't go over your time. I'm sorry. So we know that, and there's a lot of discussion that goes on about that. However, what we talk less about is actually the opportunities to drive diversity and inclusion through our supply chains, through the ecosystems that all organizations have. So regardless of how big or small an organization is, they buy stuff, okay? Obviously, the bigger stuff you buy or more stuff you buy, the bigger the ecosystem or the supply chain is, okay? But for me, I think that a lot of organizations are missing the opportunity to really harness the power of their spend to promote diversity and inclusion, okay? So if we believe that innovation, diversity in workforces can drive innovation, why wouldn't it be natural to assume that having diversity in the supply chain would also do the same thing, okay? So what can organizations do? So as we're short on time, I'll stick to two main points. So firstly, I think the first step is thinking about organizations understanding the data relating to their supply chains. So they need to understand, who are they spending their money with? Are they spending money with diverse suppliers? Are they always engaging the same kinds of suppliers? Or are they making real efforts to increase diversity in the supply chain? So the starting point is really understanding where you're spending your money and what level of diversity you have in your existing supply chain. And then from that information, then what you can then go on is go out and network and have meaningful conversations and try to identify those groups who are not represented in your supply chain. So that might be women-led businesses, ethnic minority-led businesses. We talked a little bit about intersectionality, and we've not really, mixed up the two, and understand that, there are businesses that are led by people who are women, but have also other characteristics that compound inequalities and their ability to be successful in supply chains and as entrepreneurs and as in particular as small businesses. So it's really important that once organizations understand where the gaps are, that they go out and they find and they network externally to understand why maybe those people are not applying for contracts, or maybe they need to look as well internally to understand why those organizations are not being granted those contracts. Secondly, it's really important that organizations recognize that through their spending power, that they can actually influence communities way beyond their existing or their workforce, okay? And that was something that was trying to be achieved at HS2, looking at contracts and thinking about how you can embed requirements in there to actually shift the needle on D&I. So all of a sudden, as an organization, beyond your spending power, beyond your workforce, you have an opportunity to push diversity and inclusion in communities where you operate, and also in society more generally. And what does that look like? Well, this means that organizations need to think about setting requirements for their suppliers. When they're letting contracts and tenders, they really need to make diversity and inclusion and answering questions about that crucial. They need to make it a game changer, okay? And then when you do allocate contracts, it's then about ensuring that the contractors you engage are aligned with high levels and principles to do with diversity and inclusion, but also that they're driven to deliver by KPIs and working with suppliers to be as innovative as possible, but bearing in mind that you have to have a proportionate approach depending on your size of spend. So essentially, for me, pulling together all the different elements that have been spoken about already through the supply chain, organizations have an opportunity to ask their suppliers to promote diversity and inclusion, to attract diverse people into skills and training programs, to think about how they treat innovators, to think about how they fund inventors, to make sure that all those people get a place at the table. Actually, suppliers can put into their contracts requirements and build relationships within their ecosystems and their supply ecosystems to actually really get their suppliers thinking about all these different elements that we've talked about today. But it's really important that we understand that sometimes we talk about diversity, and it's not just about diversity for diversity's sake. It's also about the fact that it's the right thing to do. But coming back to this idea that diversity and inclusion will drive innovation, it will drive productivity, and it will improve the bottom line, and it's a win-win-win for everybody. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much. And the really, really profound aspect of the work that you're doing is pretty much using existing systems and processes to achieve that scalable impact. And very often we think we have to create an additional thing to get to the point that we are happy with the impact that we're achieving. But actually, what we just need to do is look within, right? And that's what the use of supply chain actually does in terms of achieving the scalable impact. So thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful insight. I've been told that we can overrun by 10 minutes. So if we are able to stay on for 10 minutes, that'd be amazing. But if you have to drop off, I totally understand. And we've got some questions. Right, so the first question that we have is, other than the topics already covered, what other aspects do you think need to be considered to create a more diverse and inclusive innovation environment? And actually, Rosanna, I would like to come to you on that and actually just open it up to everybody after that, because I feel like there might have been some things that you might have wanted to mention.
Sorry, because I didn't hear very well then. Could you just repeat the end of the question again?
Absolutely. Other than the topics already covered, what other aspects do you think need to be considered to create a more diverse and inclusive innovation environment?
So I think something that was mentioned earlier, I believe by Alexandra, this whole thing about the role modeling notion, I think is very key. It's very crucial. So, and I know it's been mentioned, and it's not a new thing because Alexandra's covered it nicely, but I think that really is crucial. I think the other element around creating inclusive working environments, it's all very well attracting diverse talent, building diverse supply chains, but if you don't create an environment where people want to stay, then it's pretty pointless. So that's really key. You've got to create an inclusive environment as well. And I think crucially for me, for any organization trying to drive D&I, trying to drive innovation, it's really important to understand that you have to have your most senior people bought in and engaged in that whole process. So that also I think is critical.
Absolutely. I just wondered if we had any further thoughts. Alison, thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow on from what Rosanna had said, because I just think that there's this kind of assumption that says, okay, if we can use data to drive diversity or to turn the needle or whatever we decide to do, that it's all going to be fine and we've ticked a box. But actually it isn't. And a whole bunch of organizations will say, right, we'll put in a creche or we'll put in, whatever it might be in order to attract more diverse talent into our business. But you know what they don't do? They don't ask their target audience what it is that would make the difference to them. And if you don't do that, if you don't speak to your target audience and say, actually, what's fundamentally going to mean that you want to come and work in this environment, then it doesn't matter how we use the data, right? You're just going to end up with this cycle of people in and out. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're using the opportunity to ask different groups what would make a difference.
Absolutely. And it's that, I guess, basic thing of doing your market research, right? If we made it that simple, do your market research, find out what the market actually wants and requires. That's grand. Any other thoughts, contributions to that? Okay, I will go on to the next question. Right, so this is a question from the audience as well. Should we also consider other dimensions of intersectionality, neurodiversity in particular? Did we have anybody who would? Alex, I'm going to come to you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, completely. It is so important, and particularly in the field that I'm working in STEM, it's actually quite common to come across a whole range of people that are on the spectrum of neurodiversity, and that is fantastic. They are superpowers that people bring into their jobs, and we need to find the best ways of allowing those people to bring their true strength and their authentic individuality in whatever element of neurodiversity that is, in a way that is inclusive and welcoming. They feel like they can be themselves at work, that there isn't a stigma attached to it, and that actually that is respected and appreciated. And I think we still have a long way to go with that. And I see things improving, and I think the start is the conversation around it and making people feel more comfortable with talking about it and raising everybody's awareness of what that means. And I love the idea of everyone being a majority ally to someone. There is always someone within the whole spectrum of intersectionality with all the diversity characteristics. We can all be a majority ally to someone and look out for and support and champion others. So looking out for especially things that are unseen diversity characteristics is really important in helping to create that inclusive culture.
Thank you very much. The questions keep on pouring in, but I wondered if anybody else was going to add to that. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. Education has been raised a few times. How do you think we can bring educational institutions on board? This is such a huge question. It really is. And actually, educational institutions are very much part of, the audience for data, as well as the actions for progress. Does anybody have any thoughts on how we can? Oh, Erica, thank you.
So I think that we can approach this from two sides. I think that we do need to bring more educational establishments on board so that they become more diverse. But I also think that we need to widen the criteria that we use to hire, that we use to engage for supply, that we use to fund, because there seems to be this notion that if you don't get into one of the top universities, then you are for the scrap heap, as it were. And I think that we need to let go of that notion first and foremost, and start to see that actually, if we're going to look at neurodiversity, what are the chances that somebody that's neurodiverse managed to also make it into one of the elite universities against all of those odds? And so rather than allowing diversity traits to stack up against people, we should start to appreciate what they've been able to achieve and what they've done as individuals, without necessarily only relying on educational background. And then obviously there is a point at which educational establishments do need to start to broaden their nets and taking people that are from non-traditional backgrounds too.
Absolutely. Right, we've got 2 questions and 3 minutes. So Pauline has asked Rosanna, how do you persuade the buyers to take on innovative women ideas?
So in terms of the supply chain, I think if you sort of think about it from, first of all, you've got the client and then you've got the people who are supplying. So everybody at some point becomes a buyer, I guess, in the whole supply chain. But essentially, I suppose you've got to have, for me, I suppose when I think about the supply chain, I think more about how can the buyer influence the supply chain to actually promote diversity and inclusion, because it's through the spending power of the buyer that you can actually, promote that D&I within your ecosystem. The question around the buyer really is just the general question around how do we promote diversity and inclusion more broadly? How do we get organizations on board? And I think this always comes back to, I suppose, the same old arguments around really conveying to all organizations the value of promoting diversity and inclusion. And then also then the value to them in promoting that through the supply chain. But essentially, we're all buyers. And, I think that's like a global challenge around just trying to raise the bar more broadly and promoting the business case for that, as well as it being the right thing to do.
Yes. Yeah. Tell them it's the right thing to do and tell them they have to do it.
Well, this is the beauty when you're in a supply chain and you are the buyer, you can, implement requirements from your supply chain. And all of a sudden, then you're creating an ecosystem of suppliers that have to comply with D&I. And then once they see the benefits of that, it sets off a reaction, makes them more resilient as businesses, and makes them want to do more. So you drop the pebble, you get the ripples, you make the change.
Yes. I love that analogy. It's that ripple effect, right? And, I think, that really answers the final question, which is, changing a system is a daunting thought. How can we all practically work together now to bring about this change? And just as you said, we play our parts, we drop the pebble and be confident that that pebble will create the ripple effect that we need to see. But the thing is that we need to keep on dropping the pebbles, and we need to keep on doing the work. We have come to the end of our session. I cannot thank you enough for an incredible hour, for the insight that you've brought. I've definitely been challenged, and I really hope that our viewers have also been challenged. On this International Women's Day, it's about, recognizing all our efforts and celebrating all our efforts and finding the inspiration as well to keep on going, to keep on doing, just as, everybody has said, the right thing. And I hope that we're able to get our allies on board. So hopefully the people who are also celebrating International Women's Day with us to also be part of bringing about the change that we absolutely need to see. Thank you very much, Bola. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Alison, for being part of this. And thank you, and more thank yous. Take care. Thank you to everybody that has stayed with us as well for all the questions. I hope you enjoy the rest of today and all the very, very best.
Thank you, Yewande, and to our incredible speakers. So we had Alison, Erica, Alexandra, Bola, and Rosanna there. And we've now got just under an hour lunch break for you all to network with other delegates, grab a bite to eat, probably catch up on a few emails. We'll be back at 1 o'clock, where we'll be discussing how we can accelerate net zero for a better Britain here on the main stage, exploring the opportunities in ISCF with Innovate UK on stage 2, navigating the innovation rollercoaster from academia through to industry over on stage 3, or you can join IET to bust the myths about women in innovation on stage 4 after lunch. We'll see you after lunch. In the meantime, keep the conversation going on Twitter with #WomenInnovate, network with other delegates, and have a well-deserved break. Thank you, everyone.